Okay, here we have Chapter 1 Introduction section, and I'll just be covering this one section of Chapter 1. One thing I want to point out to you is that ultimately we're trying to do the entire dissertation. Chapters 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 is typical. So we sort of want to introduce, you always want to introduce information before you provide it. And since you're going to introduce an entire study, Chapter 1 of the study is really the introduction to the entire dissertation manuscript. Here's what you're going for eventually. Here's what you're going to introduce first. So Chapter 1 really introduces Chapter 2, 3, 4, and 5 with an emphasis on 2 and 3, which is your preparation for the study. 4 and 5 will also pull back from the previous chapters, especially Chapter 2, which is framework and lit review, to sort of see how your findings aligned or did not align with previous research and previous theoretical conjectures and assertions. And so what we're doing right now, just to be clear, is Chapter 1 Introduction is the introduction for Chapter 1. So you're creating the introduction for the introduction to the entire dissertation manuscript. So here we're asked to begin writing. I encourage you to, as you start to use the DPDM template or another template that's similar to you in your university, to start to realize that you have these. Why not use them as headers, at least temporary headers? Eventually what I'm going to do is I'm going to, let's say you start typing let's say all right, the socio-political environment in 2020 is causing significant health and well-being issues. I'd say that's for anybody of any party, and that's not to mention the pandemic and the social crises and chaos. And so you might say something like this. And then when I am reading later, I'll say, okay, you were trying to accomplish this. Let's look at it. And then, obviously, what you write under here, I'm just typing for the sake of, you're going to put text here, always trying to accomplish what is in the criterion just below it. May help to put a little space. So you're going to write some paragraphs based on this. And then I'm going to be able to come through and look to say, okay, you're trying to do this. Let me look at what you actually wrote. Did you do it? And a lot of times it's not a yes or no. It's a, well, good start. And then, of course, a dissertation is iterative, which means it goes back and forth and back and forth. And lots of emails, lots of discussions, lots of Zoom meetings or whatever technology we're using in the future, Skype 5.0. Begin with an overview of the general topic to establish the context of the study and orient the reader to the field. So this is an introduction of the introduction. And so you're just giving the basics. You're saying what is important. And you might say, depression is at an all-time high, according to, let's say, someone. Sad 2020. I'm just making this information up, and therefore I'm making up a fake citation just to be clear. Anxiety has reached has shown evidence of causing illness in over half of the population. Again, this is a fact that I'm making up, and I'm making up the author. And you're just sort of setting the stage on a very basic level for what you're going to be discussing. And then you can come down here and start talking about describing the larger context in which the problem exists. After 2016, socio-political unrest was a substantive social and health issue. We're going to cite angst again. The COVID-19 pandemic became a worldwide threat to physical health in 2020, but had additional psychological and social negative outcomes. And here you might cite somebody named Corona, unfortunately, sad for them. And then you might say something like, then the death of George Floyd at the hands of law enforcement led to massive protesting, rioting, and civil unrest and chaos. And we'll just cite a guy named Cuomo that I'm making up. So something like this. So notice at first we're overviewing the general topic. I didn't really do all of it, so don't expect to get away with 2 sentences, or I think I have 3 there. But overview the general topic to establish the context of the study, orient the reader. We're orienting the reader, saying, here's what this whole paper is going to be about generally. Think of it as a funnel that you are sort of funneling down. The one thing about this funnel, though, is at the very beginning it has sort of a blip. So we want to say, here's the topic, and here's what's going on in the larger context of this topic, how the problem can be addressed by this study. Now, you're not going to state your problem, but let's say your problem is ultimately going to be something about socio-political division or divisiveness leads to negative outcomes for well-being. for United States citizens, something like that. Then you could say, by understanding how the socio-political factors of 2020 in relation to the pandemic and civil unrest are perceived by American citizens, it may be possible to understand the effects on their health. Of course, I'm making all of this up as we go, but here's really what you want to do. Explain how the problem can be addressed by the study. Describe the larger context. So I described the larger context, and then I sort of made up a problem and said, well, if we sort of understand how all these factors are working together, then we can better understand, without saying what the problem is, I sort of aimed at the problem. I sort of gave a hint as to what the problem would be, so that the reader can sort of be prepared. It's foreshadowing that, as we do in fiction a lot of times. So you might even say, you're basically here, you're saying other relevant issues that matter include A, B, and C. A is described as this, B suggests this other thing, C has to do with this other thing. In the first criterion, going back up to that, you're sort of giving the context to your topic. What is the field and discipline? What is the topic? Situating the topic for the reader and providing relevant big point statistics and information, which you can continue to do in the larger context. Okay, moving on down to the third criterion, present an overview of why this research topic is relevant and warranted. Here, I encourage my students to discuss the topic with an overview of the topic, and at least one sentence that uses the words relevant and warranted. You need to use both of those words, in my opinion, but you're also trying to provide an overview of why the topic is relevant and warranted. So you want to start out maybe with the sentence that says the topic is relevant. For doctoral level research. And then you're going to provide support So who besides you believes this is worthy of doctoral level research, that it's relevant and warranted? And here's where you might start to cite key articles that suggest this generally, you're not stating the problem, but you're sort of circling around it like a buzzard, unfortunately. Cite key articles that suggest this generally is an issue that needs to be discussed. Okay? Now, here you're asked to actually dig into the research just a little bit more, and this isn't necessarily research that justifies that your problem exists, but it's giving research related to your topic. So if your topic was socio-political unrest, what might be some current or semi-current articles that would be really important to include and to discuss? You want to do that. Discuss maybe 3 to 15. 3 is really pushing it. Studies that are relevant to your topic, preferably no less than 5 years old. A lot of universities ask that 85% of your citations, especially in Chapter 2, that 85% be current by the end of your dissertation. So you might want to aim for less than 4 years old. So the point is to stay current in the literature, because old literature may be talking about a problem that has already been addressed by hundreds, if not thousands, of dissertations and other peer-reviewed journal articles, that type of thing. Note that we're asked to do 2 things in this criterion. Briefly explain what research has been done on the topic. So I want you to do that, and then why the topic is important in 3 different ways. And I call this importance by 3. I have a guide that I provide to my students, and I give them these sort of sentences which are formulaic, and I ask that you elaborate on these sentences, but use the formula to put it down. Why is the topic practically important, empirically important, and then theoretically important? You need to cover all 3 of these. The point is not to miss anything in the DPDM that is requested. And you may not fully understand what it is asking. In those cases, it's good to say, hey, Dr. whoever your chair is, I don't know what this is asking me to do. Help? Question, whatever. And you can signal to your chair, I need some help. Or you might say something else like, I think I did this correctly. Can you advise? Basically you're saying, I'm not 100% sure I did this, what they want, but I think I did. And then that's when I can say, okay, let me take a look. Or you can say, I'm 100%, I did this. And a lot of times students will write this and they didn't really do this. Not exactly correct. And so just be, it's not like we're going to hit you over the head if you think you did it correctly and you didn't. The point is we're going to have to come back and sort of fix that issue. Here I'm going to show you a neat trick while we're on the video. Go to Home. I've highlighted this text, and I've noticed that this text that I pasted was a little smaller. I want to change that. Notice that I'm going to lose my bolding. And so I basically painted this with the formatting from this. Okay, so the topic has practical importance. So what real-world applications will this affect? Will this help people sleep better at night? Things that are very practical. Empirical means what will it add to the research? What is missing in the research? Well, there's not a lot of study of, COVID-19 would be something there's very little study on. There's, depending on what year you're watching this. But then as the socio-political unrest of 2020, you might try to say that it's unique in some way, especially combined with the pandemic, the George Floyd murder, the chaos, the social and socio-political unrest and divisiveness. And so you might say that this really hasn't been studied. It hasn't been researched how this is affecting people on a psychological level. And you might say, well, there's a lot of focus on legislation or on Black Lives Matter or on these other things, but what we don't have is scientific research that sort of addresses these key variables that you're going to point out. And then theoretical importance, you might have a theory in mind. You say there are a lot of theories about disruption and uncertainty. I've written one, a theory on activating uncertainty, but it doesn't really address socio-political divisiveness and how that relates to well-being. And so you might sort of, this is your first chance to say how you're going to expand upon a theory that you already have, a theory that's already out there, and say this is adding to it in some way. It's expanding or extending current theory by addressing a new population or a new facet or a new concept that is relevant to the theory already, or maybe by providing sort of a grounded theory. There's no theory that sort of addresses this at all, and so it's providing some basic theoretical understanding of what is going on where there was none before. That's rarely the case, in my opinion, so be cautious with sort of making that assertion. And it may not look like it, but we're really almost done here. Clearly lead the reader to the problem statement to follow. So again, without stating it, lead the reader to the problem. Discuss it. Give them a nice little background. Concise, but meaningful. Make it impactful. Engage your reader to your topic and make it all but clear that, make it all but very obvious what your problem is without stating it. So the reader should not be surprised by the problem described later in the document, which is about, a few sentences away, the next section. Again, what I've said is because of this rule we typically have in the introduction, we're not going to yet explicitly state the problem, the purpose, the methodology, any of that, because there's a time for that, like in the song, for everything turn. There is a season, and that season is not yet. You're going to discuss that later on. So wait for that. Don't yet state your problem. You can hint around, you can circle above it like a buzzard, but you're not yet going to state it. And often I do see people state it, and I say, take this out, move it down to the problem section, which will be coming next. The other thing you want to pay attention to is, did you reach the 2-page limit? And if so, make sure you didn't go over the 4-page limit. Now, those are not sort of, breaking the law, anything like that, deal breakers. Like if you're 4.5, 5 pages, but it's really good content, great. If you're 1 page and 3/4 of a page, then you might be able to get away with that if you write very concisely and write very well and cleanly and clearly. However, 2 to 4 pages is what we recommend. Notice that these are sort of almost like notes on what you've written above. So most of your writing is going to come from these things above. Notice again, this was chapter 1, introduction section. We're not going to go much further because next is a statement of the problem, and we'll have discussion on that shortly. Thank you for your time.